Hello and welcome guys. So I'm doing take two because take one was absolutely shit and I bumped into a few errors and there were a few too many to cut out, so I figured I'd just restart. And yep, another one, we cannot see VS Code. Now we can. Why isn't this one showing though? There we go. That's better. So what was I saying? Right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to go through the Explore code. We're going to go through the Explore code and explain how everything works so that we can see how everything is connected together. And the other thing that we're going to do is just go through some of the, well, other basics around how the game is actually being built and working and testing just to see how things run, and we'll just really go through it. So first question was, how can we get this to actually run? There is a run.py over here, which looks very basic, and I should really actually change it just a little. And there is a, well, it's, yeah, you don't start from running the run.py. You run run.sh, which will load the app. Which will load the app. So what we do here is /run.sh. So this is going to throw up the server with fast API and also the ticker. And here, if we just open this, I've already got it open on a different window, brings us here. I'm just going to give it a quick refresh. Sorry if I'm talking too fast. So here we can try out the several endpoints. So this one actually tells you, will actually get your kingdom exploring. So what you do is here you're going to type a kingdom ID, and later down the line here we'll just be sending a token. We're not going to be sending actual kingdom IDs, we're just going to be sending the token that people are logged in with. And here the quantity that they explored, so in this case let's say 20, well let's say 12, why not, and execute. So we can see here that the answer is there's a status success and then returns an action ID. So explore UUID, we can probably rename that to action ID since it'll be more generalized. So we get this action ID over here. So what does that mean? Well, the next endpoint is a response endpoint where you can give it the action ID. So once you execute this, it will tell you, so for example here in this case it gave us a failure, error not enough gold, because we didn't have enough gold to actually explore this amount of land. So if I do, for example, just quantity 1, now I execute, I have a new action ID. I bring it over here, I'll execute this, I still get not enough gold. Do I really not have enough gold? Or is this just messing it up? Let's check. If I go to kingdoms, I've got no gold whatsoever. So yeah, that is correct. I have no gold. What we can do here is I will actually new query. Okay, so we should now have gold. We do now have gold. Fantastic. And let's try again. So this time let's try exploring 24. Execute. We get this action ID. And if we now check the status of the action, we now get a success. Fantastic. Lovely. The other thing that we can check is if we try to explore more land than we are allowed to, this might get not enough gold as well. But I'm hoping it will tell us too much quantity instead. Error too much quantity. So yeah, so those are the two errors that you can get from exploring. It's either you don't have enough gold or you're requesting too much quantity to explore according to your maximum quantity. And we managed to see both. We've got another endpoint for the price. Here you just input the kingdom ID and it'll give you the price for that kingdom ID. Currently I've put it just price 10, always returning price 10. I think exploring might be a fixed price, or it'll definitely be a different formula than what we currently have, which is a lot more forgiving. Just because I want kingdoms to be incentivized to grow, to not have so much. Because currently, right now, when you're growing your kingdom, sometimes you don't even want to build your land because it's so expensive. I find that rather counterintuitive. Let's check this endpoint, which is just for exploring the current quantity. So if I check for the kingdom ID, it tells us current quantity is 28. If we here add 24, we come back and check the current quantity again. So execute 52, so that's working. And the maximum quantity for Kingdom 1, let's find out what it is. I think I put a Kingdom Land / 10, maybe it was. Something like that. Okay, and it can tell, and here this endpoint will tell us what the current explorer looks like. So when you're in your building screen, you want to see how much land you're exploring per tick. It returns a dictionary like this, saying on this tick you will be exploring this amount of land. So yeah, that's very nice. Okay, so these are the endpoints. Since I've already got the database open, on the database it just looks like this. So Kingdom ID, tick, and the quantity. So we will have a log of when people were exploring. So if they're doing something weird, we can see from here. If not, it's just very simple. It's just 3 columns and that's it. The kingdoms table, you already saw it. The tick table just has the tick, and when it's finished ticking, we've got the accounts table, and we've got an action log table. So for example, here these are the explorers that I just put through before, and we can also see what the result was. So error too much quantity, error not enough gold, error not enough gold, error not enough gold. So this will be relatively easy to audit later if we're checking for cheaters, and if we see there's too many of these failures for the same reason, it doesn't quite add up. We can look at the timings. So we'll be able to see quite detailed information. Let's say how much they asked for. Yeah, we'll be able to see quite detailed information from there. But before we get too deep into the rabbit hole going through this, let me just close a few things over here and get us to something that's a bit more top level. Okay, so we're done with run. What we're going to do now is just find the explore, and we want to look at the backend API. So what you're going to see here is these match the endpoints that we've just been testing on the other side. So this is an exact match to these. And as you can see, so we've got explore, we've got the response, we've got the price, we've got the current quantity, we've got max quantity, we've got the current explorer table, right? So this is a very one-to-one relationship, and the code here is actually quite simple. So it calls explore, and it says get max quantity for the max quantity. For the current explorer table, it calls explore with the kingdom ID, and it says get current explorer table. And then you'll notice that all of these have this API response. So this is just to generate the response, and it does some boilerplate for you. If you wanted to look at what the response is, it has statuses, then it has this from action. So this is something that all actions will use. And it has this add details and generate response. You don't have to worry too much about this for the time being. You'll see that it's quite straightforward, and it's quite just, you always follow the same pattern. You build a response with success true. So success false in this case would only be if there was an actual error, as in the application had an error, not there was a user input error. You add some details to the response, you generate the response, and you send it back. And you'll see, so we have these 4 lines which are very similar to these ones, which are the same one, very similar to these ones, very similar to these ones, and very similar to these ones. So it doesn't really change that much. You just have to learn. You just have to understand it once. You understand it all these times. We've got these explore constants. So the constants are just so that we are not actually typing out text, so that we can always see, so that it's easier to debug. We use this. And so let's actually go and look at this explore, since this is where all the action is really happening. Now this explore, we can see that it comes from the backend explore. And I hope I'm not going too fast, but we just jumped into the backend explorer. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is you'll recognize the error not enough gold and error too much quantity. So those were the 2 errors that we ran into. When we call the explorer class, we're always passing the kingdom ID in. So here we see the kingdom ID, and we initialize a kingdom, and we also initialize the Explorer API. Now this Explorer API is the database API. We will be looking at it in a minute. As you saw above, so below, get price. Here it's just returning 10 for the price. And as I mentioned, we will certainly have a different formula than what Sclone and Nebula use. Get max quantity, so here it's just returning Kingdom Land divided by 10. Get current quantity, so it gets the whole Explorer table, sums it up, and get current Explorer table. It calls the Explorer API and asks to get the Explorer for this kingdom based on this next tick, starting from the next tick actually. And here we've got the Explorer method. When you've got the Explorer method, it starts by logging the action, and then it puts the actual running of the action in a different thread, and it returns the action ID. So here, when we started logging the action, this action object will have an action ID inside, and so that's what we're returning, right? So when we're here and we call the Explorer and we get back this Explorer UUID, it's this action ID that we are getting back. And now the reason, so we've put this in different thread. What does this mean? This means that the code comes here, it does this logging thing. This will go and run separately, and this action will be sent back before this is finished running. Now this obviously runs quite fast, so this is not totally necessary. But what this allows us to do is this allows us to schedule it. This will allow us to schedule things with the ticker, so it will allow us to put things with the ticker. Now this one is just simply put on a separate thread so that it can right away skip to this. But this separate thread, you'll see from the Explorer API, the database Explorer API below, that it will call to the ticker so that it maintains the order of the actions. Okay, so important things here: it logs, it sends back the ID, and then it starts doing this Explore method, which is just down here. Now, the Explorer method, which is down here, it does the things you would expect it to do. It gets the price, it calculates the total price, it gets the max quantity, it checks your current quantity. It makes sure that what you're trying to do is fine. If you're trying to over-explore, it will tell you that you have too much quantity. It checks that you have enough money to actually explore. If you don't have enough money to explore, it'll set it to failure and it'll return. Now over here, we're doing this like this because something else like the user might have been trying to do multiple things which cost gold at the same time, and so that's why we have this try except. That's why we have this try except, because here when it does this, it will try and update the database, so try and change the amount of gold in the database. But if it doesn't have enough gold, it will fail, and so it'll tell it error, not enough gold. Assuming that everything goes fine, then it calls the Explorer API and just explores and sets success. So as you can see, like here we've got some business logic checking. Here we've got these are all business logic based as well, so getting the price as a formula, getting the max quantity as a formula, getting the current Explorer table. Here it's not really doing anything other than, calls a method that gets the Explorer and sums it up. And here it's literally just calling the Explorer API. And here, well, it's doing the action, and then here it's doing some business logic. So as you can see, like at this level, so at the backend level, it's mostly business logic. You don't have any direct interaction with the database. And that's the important difference between the backend and the database API. So just to go back a moment, so the backend API is what you get to see when you're here. So it's what the front end will call. The front end will call the backend API. The backend API uses the backend code, and the backend code uses the database API. Okay, and the database API, which is this one now, is the one that actually calls the database. So this one actually calls the Explorer table in the database. The Explorer table, so this is the Explorer table defined with SQL Alchemy. As we saw before, it just has kingdom ID, tick, and quantity. And so the database API is the only one that actually directly calls the database. Okay, and so this is where the code might look a bit more tricky. So the Explorer API, we have a lock. So the lock is for multi-threading. So when you're multi-threading, when you're using multiple threads, if you lock the action, that means that only one of these threads will be able to interact with that piece of code at any one point in time. Meaning, so only one thing will be able to run. Basically, you won't be able to have multiple things if the thread is locked. If the thread was not locked, any one of them and any amount of them could be running at the same time. The reason why you lock it is because when you're doing updates to the database, you don't want two things updating the database at the same time, as one of the updates might get lost or like might override the other update, to be more accurate. Okay, so the Explorer API, we started off with a Kingdom ID. I realized the video is getting long already, not necessarily a bad thing, but we're almost done, at least with this part. So we start the Explorer API with the Kingdom ID, and then we've got this Explore method, which is called. And so here you can see, okay, Kingdom ID equals Kingdom ID. If Kingdom or quantity are less than 0, we go back, we get the tick, we lock the thread. So this is so that you can't have two things trying to update the Explorer table at the same time, essentially. We get what is already being currently explored. We calculate how much land we will explore per tick based on the quantity of land that we want to explore. So we calculate what the updated tick table will look like, and then we just submit, and then we just actually perform those updates. So the calculate explorer to add, it's hourly quantity is quantity divided by the explorer time. The leftovers, how much quantity is left when you do a full division rather than so an integer division rather than a float division. Then the explore land, this is just defining, so this is just building a list of how much land you'll be exploring every tick. And this is adding to that list the leftovers from here. Okay, so then this exploring ticks. So this is just actually creating a list starting from the current tick to 24 ticks from now, or how many the explorer time is. Then this data is just actually assigning ticks to the explorer land, and finally it returns a data frame with all of this. Calculating the explorer, so this one is actually taking in the old explorer and the new explorer, and it calculates what the updated explorer will look like. Get explorer, so this one actually interacts with the database. It's just saying from the explorer table, get the tick, get the quantity, where the kingdom is this kingdom, and where the tick is this tick or more. And finally, submit explorer. This is just separating what needs to be updated from what needs to be added. So let's say that you're exploring and you're exploring for the first time this tick, and so the tick 24 ticks from now wouldn't have had any explore going on. So for that one, it'll add it. But the tick that is the tick after this one, assuming we've explored before, will just simply need an update. Okay, so the add explorer is done with pandas to SQL, and the update explorer is done with SQL Core, SQL Alchemy Core, so that we can do a bulk update and so that it's faster, basically. So this is definitely the more brain damaging part of the code, is the Explorer, and it's the database API level. But this kind of covers the whole Explorer. So you can rather easily go from, okay, so this is the backend API. So this is what the front end will use, which is the backend API. You come to the backend API, you can see the match. From the backend API, you will go to the backend. So you end up going to the Explorer in the backend. The Explorer in the backend has very similar methods to what the backend API had. After all, it's meant to match it, and it holds the business logic. Okay, so we get the backend API, which is just to interact for the front end to interact with, yeah. And so it calls the backend and it creates a response. So this one is really super simple layer, yeah. It gets the information that it needs to get from the backend and it creates the response. The backend itself holds the business logic and calls the database API, so all the business logic, and then it does these well, it has this Explore API from the backend API which it calls, and the Explore API from the database API is the one that actually interacts with the database, right? So hopefully that's clear enough. A few other things that we might want to look at over here quickly. Let's see. I have got this script for building the dummy data up. The ticker. Actually, the ticker is a good one. So I was fairly surprised when I actually finished coding this, which is okay. I was not expecting to see that message there. So pop it back open. I'm not even sure what I'm doing there, to be fair. I think it's comparing it to a previous commit. So here the Tick Explorer, I was actually quite surprised, but it's really, this is all it needs to do in order to tick the Explorer. It selects from kingdoms where kingdom ID, and it selects from Explorer where kingdom ID is equals to the kingdom ID, and the Explorer tick is equals to the next tick. The next tick is passed in as a parameter, and it updates based on current kingdom land plus the Explorer quantity. That's all it does. And you can see down here that it's actually it's completing these ticks. It's running them as it goes. Actually, it's been running them as it goes. The ticker itself is a topic for another video, because this video is really getting quite long, and I'll have to review the code to be able to better explain it. But in essence, like, the tick is always running, and it's listening to the API. It shares the space with the API for this message broker, and so both the ticker and the API use this basic scheduler, which is the guy who is really orchestrating things. The guy who is orchestrating things is actually a schedule, and it runs things in threads. So this is definitely going to be a topic for another day. And here you can see that it just keeps running the tick at every minute. I wanted to be able to compare the past to current. So if you go to kingdoms, I select it, you can see that the land has actually been increasing. So initially when we started the video, I think it was about 1006 land. Now it's already at 1025 land, because it's just simply been increasing this whole time. And if we just wait for the minute to turn over and for it to complete another tick, we should see a change on there. Other than that, I hope the code is now a bit clearer. As I said, I'll definitely get into the ticker on another video. I'll make a different video for that, because I need to review the code, and well, I think a fresh video for that one will do it justice. There we go, starting tick, calculating income. Now the calculating income is just bullshit. It's not actually doing anything, it's just sleeping for now. But look at these, 1025, 1062. So if we now run select, oh sorry, I meant the kingdoms, 1026, there we go. So that one increased by 1. Lovely. So that's everything for now, and thank you for watching this, and thank you for your help. Enjoy.